Louie T. Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I, of course, am your commander-in-chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. So, season 4, episode 1 of Commander's Log has dropped. So many people were excited last night. I didn't even know it was coming. I ended up on social media right before the start of my podcast last night, and I saw the Washington Commanders put out the little tease, and then somebody added me, and that's how I knew. And so I was going to watch it before my podcast ran out of time, and so I said I'll just save it for afterwards. And you know I like to react to these videos, and they get us charged up. And last year, it was a really good series, well done, obviously following the journey of Josh Harris and coming here to Washington and kind of instilling hope back into the franchise and the fan base. And so this year, it's now no longer about hope. It's now about building this thing back up from the ground, okay? We were torn down by Daniel Snyder and company for over a quarter of a century, and now we need to build this thing back up. And there are so many parts of this first episode that I absolutely love, and I'm going to express that in this recap. We'll go through each section. I'll give you the notes that I took. I took notes. I told you I generally don't take notes, but when it's something like this, I like to have my thoughts all collected and organized. So first of all, to start, I love the title of this video. Hard shit with good people. I love the title, right? And I think that's going to become a mantra here with the fan base, and sort of a rallying cry, if you will. Right? I think that's one of the new lines. That's a hard bar, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later on in this breakdown. But the show starts, this episode starts with players talking at their exit interviews. Jahan Dotson is talking about, needing a fresh start, needing to, hit the reset button. Sam Cosmi is talking about wanting to be a winner and wanting to be a part of a winner, and that the changes need to be made, and it's up to Josh Harris and company to figure out how to make that happen. And you see John Bates clearing out his locker, and Logan Thomas putting all of his things into a box and leaving the facility. And so it's kind of representing the end of one era and moving into the next. And then you see Josh Harris talking about needing change. And then they go to Adam Peters. And so that's where the real beginning of the video kind of takes place, the hiring of Adam Peters and that process. You hear about Josh Harris hiring the advisory committee and, all of the reaction to that. And then Peters speaks about the Washington job. He sits down in the seat, and this is the teaser video that we all saw when he sits down in the seat and he says, okay, Commander's Log. And he starts to talk about why this job was the job that he wanted. And we've all been so impressed by how fast everything moved with the hire of Adam Peters. But I think we've also been sucked in emotionally because I said this. I can't speak for anybody else. I said this when we got Adam Peters. Why it meant so much to me as a fan is because I've been through the dark years. I've seen it at its worst. I've seen it at its best. Okay, not as good as some of you who are a lot older than me who actually saw it at its peak of its superpowers, but I was a part of a Super Bowl victory as a fan, albeit a small one. I can remember it. I enjoyed it. And then I've seen the dark, lean years, and there have been many, and most of you have seen that and lived through that. And one of the things that struck me was Peters wanting us. That was what I said in the video that I did when we got him on board. Was it felt good to see the best prospect out there, them see us tell that prospect we want you, and that energy be reciprocated. That hasn't happened here in Washington in quite some time. And he talked about why this job was appealing to him. And he talked about his parents, his mom living in New York, his wife's mom living in New York. So being closer to her and them really is important for them and their family. They have two small children. They would like their two daughters to see their grandparents or their grandmothers more often. So that makes a ton of sense. And now to just tying this in as a quick side note, it all makes sense now why he wanted that Giants GM job 2 years ago when he interviewed. I mean, this was a guy that was very selective in the jobs that he went for because he could be selective. He was the hottest name on the market in the GM category, right? As an assistant, he was the next guy up. He was the next big thing. And so him going and interviewing for the Giants job, he wanted to be closer to his mom and he wanted his wife to be closer to her mom. So it makes sense now why the Giants job appealed to him. And they ultimately went with the whole Buffalo connection of Joe Schoen. And he had a conversation with Joe Schoen, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But he talked about Washington and wanting to restore the history. And he talked about this being one of the pillars of the NFL. And I don't think a lot of fans, especially the younger ones, understand how important Washington is to the NFL in the grand scheme of things. And I think that I know all of the people in the league understand how important Washington is to the NFL. There's an East Coast bias that exists. It always has and it always will. That's why you always hear about Dallas every day, even if there's nothing going on in Dallas. That's why the Giants get 3 or 4 primetime games, even though they suck ass, right? And that's why the Eagles are going to be built up and going to be put in front of us every opportunity that they get because it's an East Coast bias. And Washington's supposed to be a part of that. And when we were at the peak of our superpowers, the NFL was thriving and flourishing. So they would love, this is one of the biggest media markets in the NFL, and it's not being handled as such, which is why they want Josh Harris to restore order in the nation's capital, because there's so much money here to be gained, and there's so much more attention that can be shined on this team in this area because it's such a huge part of the NFL. And he's like, this is a pillar of the NFL, and we want to restore the glory to Washington and make this thing important again and make this thing a reality. So it was great to hear him kind of regurgitate that again. He had already said that at his press conference, but just reiterating that point and making it abundantly clear why he wanted this job gives me the warm and fuzzies. I'm not going to lie to you. Another takeaway from that early portion, his daughters are so cute, see his wife and all of that good stuff. We heard about her, right, at the press conference and, all of that good stuff, but we never got to see them. So we did see the daughters when he was walking off the plane on the little cut up. And obviously that was a cut up that they threw on social media from the footage they got for the Commander's Log video, as we all know now. But Mayhew was always going to be here. We got confirmation of that. And I told y'all that I don't think Mark Mayhew's, and I said, I would bet just about any amount of money Mark Mayhew's not going anywhere. And we already found that out probably about a month ago or so, maybe 3 weeks ago. They solidified that. I don't know if they actually gave him a title. I'm pretty sure they've given him a title by now. I don't care what his title is. They were going to make up a title because that's what they do. If that's your boy and you want him to have a job, you'll make up a title for him, right? Because we have an assistant GM. So they gave him some kind of title. And that's cool. I don't have any issues with Mark Mayhew as long as he's not making the final decision. And he's not. But this is how I know Mayhew was never going anywhere. And you saw this in the video too. Josh Harris, when Mayhew came up, because Adam Peters thanked Mayhew for coming to his press conference and supporting him. And Mayhew was like, no doubt, bro. Like, you know what it is. And Mayhew's head, he's probably saying, bro, you the reason I still got a job here. If it wasn't for you, I'd have been fired too. And so he goes over and they all embrace and they go over and talk to Josh Harris. And Harris is like, hey, we got the dream team back together. And I'm like, the dream team? But that just goes to show you that he was more respected in the building than we thought. And it is what it is. I don't have any issues with it, right? So we move on from the Adam Peters hire, and then we go to the Senior Bowl. And there's a lot to unpack here. So I'll go through all of my notes. It starts with Pete Piccarelli, who is a scout, and he said he has been a scout for this organization for 7 years. And boy, the life of a scout is rough. And he talked about being away from his family for 4 to 5 months at a time. Somebody asked me, would I like to be a scout? And I was like, hell no. Do you understand what those guys go? You got to love it. And not that I don't, but I don't love it that much where I'm willing to sacrifice that much time away from my family. Because it's almost a thankless job. It's almost a thankless job being a scout. The only rewards I feel like scouts get are promotions and winning the Super Bowl. It's cool if one of the guys you bang the table for ultimately gets it, and gets selected, and you were a huge part of that. That's a probably a nice reward too, but that's fleeting, right? That happens and then it goes away. Now you got to do it again, right? It's a tough job. It's damn near thankless. So he talked about that. He talked about the depth along the offensive and defensive lines at the Senior Bowl, which is good for us. We need offensive line help in particular. And he's like, I see guys first, second, third round littered up and down the Senior Bowl. So that's good news for us. And that kind of correlates, right? And is in line with what we've heard from others who study the draft, who have said this is a very deep offensive line draft class. That's music to our ears because that's what we probably need more so than anything else in terms of quantity, right? Edge rusher is right there too. We don't have any edge rushers either, but specifically offensive linemen. If you're going to draft a guy as high as we think we're going to draft at the quarterback position, you better be able to protect that asset. So offensive line help definitely, I think, within reach this offseason between free agency and the draft. I think we're going to be able to tighten that up. And then he also talked about what the Senior Bowl represents for scouts. He's like, we're isolated essentially for half of the year. We're off in our little section of the U.S. scouting these programs, these players, and we're pretty much doing all this by ourselves. Yeah, we run into guys here and there and we talk a little, but we got work to do. Head is down, we're grinding away. And it's not until we get to the Senior Bowl where we actually get to see everybody and get to talk to other people. He's like, it's almost like a big convention where we get to come together and talk, and you get to be sociable. You get to be social, right? So the Senior Bowl represents almost finality for them. All the work that they've put in. The draft is finality, right? But the Senior Bowl starts to represent you're almost at the finish line. You can do it. You're almost there, right? I'm not going to lie to you. There's a dude in a Bills hoodie that Adam Peters embraces at the Senior Bowl. It's one of the first people they show him dapping up. I could have sworn that was Jason Wright. I was like, yo, Jason Wright worked for the Bills now? I was tripping for a second. And then I realized that's not Jason Wright. But it took me about a good 30, 45 seconds. I'm staring hard as a bitch like, wait a minute. Is that Jason Wright? What are you doing with a Bills hoodie on? So that was a nice little chuckle for me. I can't speak for anybody else out there. Adam Peters was making his Senior Bowl rounds, including kicking it with Washington offensive lineman Chris Paul. So I don't know if you guys know this, but his brother is going to be drafted this year, and he's actually a really good offensive lineman. He was at the Senior Bowl, and so Chris Paul was there supporting his brother. So obviously, if the new GM is there, you're going to run into him and you're going to talk with him. And he did. I don't know if they set that up for the cameras in particular, or if Chris Paul, which I would do if I were him, I just wanted to go up and meet the dude and kick it with him for a little bit just so he knows who I am, because I'm hoping to be a part of this roster moving forward. So they have a little interaction, and he's like, yo, I might hit you up for some scouting advice. And Chris Paul's reaction was funny to me. He was like, yo, scouting department? Like, wait a minute, right? Anyway, then I put down in my notes in all caps, because you could see Adam Peters was talking to the people before the news broke. But remember, if we go back in the timeline just a smidge, I had told everybody, because remember, there was mass hysteria amongst the fan base when he took off. We found out, I think it was John Kime that tweeted out kind of like in passing that morning that Peters had gotten on the plane to meet up with everyone else who had already gone out to the Senior Bowl. And everybody's like, yo, wait a minute. What is he doing? There must be one of these guys with the Chiefs or the 49ers that they're looking to interview. And I'm like, no, guys. The process is done. He wouldn't have left to go join everybody at the Senior Bowl if this wasn't finished. It's over. They've made their decision already. And a lot of people were freaking out and they were trying to come up with these alternate theories. We got confirmation that it was done. You know, he went up, he was dapping people up. Nobody knew about the Dan Quinn hire. Then his phone rings, right? That's Dan Quinn. Remember, they talked about it at the press conference. Dan Quinn calling back because he had missed the initial call, and them confirming that he was the, coach or whatever. And then it got released to the masses while he was at the Senior Bowl that day. We found out that day, and everybody started congratulating him, right? And so, you see all of that happening. So we confirmed what we thought, which was he had already extended the job offer to Dan Quinn before he got on that plane to go to the Senior Bowl. They already had made up their mind that DQ was the guy. Peters was then being congratulated by everybody about the DQ hire, and it just speaks to the amount of respect that Dan Quinn has around league circles. I mean, the outpouring of support that we've seen on behalf of Dan Quinn, talking about his character as a man, not just as a football coach. Like, no one was talking about how good of a coach he is. At the tail end of all of this, Adam Peters had to throw in, oh yeah, and he's a damn good coach, because nobody wanted to talk about him as a coach. That's how you know you've left an indelible mark. When nobody wants to talk about your profession, they just want to talk about you, the person, because it's so great. You, the person, is so outstanding and fun to be around and infectious and genuine. That's all anybody wants to talk about, is how great of a person you are. Like, this guy is so real and he's so authentic and he's genuine and he is one of the best human beings. Like, that is the greatest compliment anybody can give you. Like, Dan Quinn has left a tremendous mark everywhere he's been and on so many different people. And we've heard that over and over again. It kind of feels like Ron Rivera times 10 though, times 100. So then I found it interesting, and I had to do this. I started a stud counter, okay? How many times the word stud was used in reference to Dan Quinn? And the stud counter got all the way up to 9. Peters himself used it 7 times. 2 other individuals that he was talking with used it an additional 2 times. 9 times the word stud was used to describe Dan Quinn. It was crazy. Anyway, and then I just had to throw this in here. Our GM is a savage. I love it. Adam Peters is a straight savage. He was talking to Giants GM Joe Schoen, right? That's the guy that beat him out for the job, the GM job in New York. And he tells Joe Schoen, yeah, Dan Quinn's a giant killer. And I don't know if y'all caught that bar or not. I don't know if you caught that line. That shit might have went right over your head. But he literally told this man, yeah, Dan Quinn's a giant killer. Now, he came back and cleaned it up afterwards, after he already had murdered him with that line. He could have just dropped the mic and walked away. But they came back, cleaned it up, because it looked like he was killing Shane. Like he had just hacked him to death, right? But he said, actually, Dan Quinn's like, and then he threw out some number against the NFC East, like 19-3 or some shit he said. And he was like, yo, so your research, turned up those numbers, huh? And that's what Joe Schoen said. And Adam Peters started laughing. So that was a funny moment. But our GM is a savage. I love that he took a nice little shot at the Giants GM and the Giants organization right there with that one. Anyway, I digress. You get to then the final part of this episode 1, and that's the DQ hire. And um, I just want to say this: my coach is so swagalicious, right? My coach he's dripping and oozing swag, right? My coach wears his hat to the back on some TLC shit. My coach has on a Jordan, jacket, and he's got on birds on his feet. And I'm checking out my coaches. He's getting off the plane, walking into the building. He sits down, and I'm like, yo, my man DQ has on some low 11, 72 and 10s, man. My coach he's not your coach, okay? He's different. My coach is different. How many coaches in the NFL rocking birds? Anyway, that has nothing to do with nothing. I just love the swag that our coach has. I said all that to say this. I just love the swag that our coach has. My favorite part of the episode, my absolute favorite part, and do me a favor, leave it down in the comment section. What was your favorite part of the episode? What was your favorite part of episode 1? Mine was Joe Gibbs' conversation with Dan Quinn as he was getting ready for his introductory press conference. And I don't know if it happened. The way they showed it on the episode, they made it seem like as he was going in to prepare for his introductory press conference, he got on the phone with Coach Joe. But it could have been afterwards because Coach Joe already knew about Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt Jr. And there's no way that was already set in motion because Cliff Kingsbury at that time was already supposed to be inking a deal with the Raiders. So there's no way that phone call came before the presser. It probably came after. But that's nor here nor there. The bottom line is I absolutely loved that conversation. And one of the biggest reasons why I loved that conversation and why that was my favorite part of the episode is because nobody knows this organization. Nobody knows us as a fan base quite like Coach Joe. He gets it more than anybody else. And he understands what this shit means to us and what this team is supposed to represent. And he said, look, they care about ball and they want this thing back. He knows. And the thing about Joe is he's such a good dude. Coach Joe is such a good dude that he knew Dan Snyder won't shit, but he was never going to say that, and he was never going to allow others to say that. But he knew Dan Snyder won't shit, and he was bringing this franchise crumbling to its knees. But he was going to support anyway because that's who Coach Joe is at his core. But you hear him talking about restoring the glory here, and he said, look, it's not going to be easy. And it's a lot of pressure that comes with it. Coach Joe was like, look, I didn't sleep for 2 days after I got the job. I was so riled up. And he said, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. If you win here, it's the one thing in that town. He says the most powerful place in the U.S., in the country. And he's not wrong. And he said the one thing that brings it all together is that football team. You win and you'll see how this thing unifies that community. And, Dan Quinn, he said, look, Coach Joe said the owners are from there, which most of them are. And he's like, Dan Quinn himself, lived here for a little bit, right? So he understands how important this is as well. And he's like, look, you got a hell of a task in front of you, but you can do it. You got my support. And he's like, one of the most important things you can do is surround yourself with great coaches. You're not going to win this thing by yourself. And that's where Rivera failed us, is he didn't surround himself with great coaches. He surrounded himself with yes men. And Coach Joe surrounded himself with great coaches. We know about the Rennie Simmonses, and the Coach Joe Bugles, and we can go on and on about all of the guys that he brought here that were influential in the success of Washington, right? that conversation was everything for me. I watched that conversation like 3 times. I watched this show, this episode twice, but I watched that conversation 3 times. I just love Coach Joe. I really do. It's a different type of love that I have for Coach Joe. So that was my favorite part. Then DQ dropped the classic bar. They showed the press conference and little bits and pieces from it. And there is nothing I enjoy doing. He said, there is nothing I enjoy more than doing hard shit with good people. And again, that's the hardest bar we've heard here in Washington in quite some time. There's nothing I enjoy more than doing hard shit with good people. That's the rallying cry. Because I feel like I do that with y'all every day. We do hard shit as fans. You know what we've gone through? Do you understand? I know y'all get it. I'm preaching to the choir right now. Y'all get it. You've been through it. I see the hurt. We talked through the hurt during the course of a season. After that Bears game this year, that's as down a fan base as I've seen. We weren't mad. We were dejected. We were defeated after that Bears game. A lot of y'all saw the writing on the wall then. I know I did. The Giants game, the Bears game felt like putting us in the coffin, and the Giants game, the first one at the Meadowlands when we scored 7 points and lost, felt like them putting us in the ground and putting dirt on us. It was over, right? We've gone through some hard shit together. And we'll continue to go through the hard shit together. It's not over, okay? It's not over. We're just starting. But you guys are good people. You're really good people. And so I can definitely side with that notion of doing hard shit with good people. So that one kind of hits hard for me. And then I think after that, DQ sat down in the chair, same chair that Adam Peters sat down in at the very beginning of the episode. And he talked about this job in particular and why this job is important to him and why he wanted this job. And what it did for me is, I'm always looking at things from alternate angles. And what that did for me was it solidified why Dan Quinn, who had other coaching opportunities over the last 2 years, particularly, after the first year he killed it in Dallas, the Jaguars came calling and they pretty much were offering him the job. And he was like, nah, I'm good. And he could have potentially gotten a job with the Denver Broncos if he wanted it. The Indianapolis Colts job was there for him if he wanted it. There were jobs that were there that if he wanted them, I think he would have gotten them. And he just wasn't interested. And sitting down and listening to him talk about the synergy that he needed with the GM. He needed to have that synchronicity with the GM. That was paramount. It was imperative. He needed to have the support of ownership. He needed to have the autonomy to be able to go out and build this staff the way that he has. He needed all of these things to be aligned in order to take an opportunity. And when I sit back and think about Jacksonville, they were pushing Trent Baalke on him. He did not want Trent Baalke. That's the reason Byron Leftwich, who in hindsight looks like a big mistake, he's not even in the league right now, didn't take the job. Nobody wanted to work with Trent Baalke. So he didn't want the Jaguars job. The Broncos had hired a new GM the year prior to firing their head coach and looking to hire a new guy, which ultimately turned into Sean Payton. And so he wasn't going to be able to hit the ground running with that GM and be in lockstep with him. That GM was already going to have a vision for what the Broncos were going to look like. And he was going to have to come in and kind of try to help bring that to life instead of him being a part of the architecture of what was going to come, right? So it makes sense why Washington was the right job for him. He talked about the history. He talked about the relationship he has with Adam Peters, the relationship that Josh Harris has created with him, Adam Peters, and, the rest of the ownership group and how they were willing to do things like Magic Johnson going in and getting Cliff Kingsbury for him. He wanted the support of the front office, and he's gotten it. That was important to him. And so he kind of closed the show out talking about why this job was the right job. And again, the more I hear from Dan Quinn, the more it becomes apparent. It may not have been initially what we wanted, but it was everything that we needed. It was everything that we needed. Anyway, that was episode 1 of season 4 in a nutshell. Tell me what you thought about the episode. Did you enjoy it as much as I did? And most importantly, what was your favorite part of episode 1? All right, leave it down in the comment section. Can't wait to read your responses. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this installment of the Command Post. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. Until next time, you guys have a good one. See you next time.
LouieTeeNetwork.